third plenary session will be the fireside chat, and it will be on the theme, the digital nexus, tech services as the backbone of a unified market. The moderator for this session is Rubat Oseni, who is Assistant Manager, Commercial Operations, in charge of gas scheduling. He will be moderating this session. And the speakers to join him on the program are Mr. Ayodele Asaolu, CEO, Lord's Way Energies, and then also Isaac Yodenu Abua, founder and host of the Change Africa podcast. He's also a member of the governing board of the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council, CHEC. And so if you are here, perhaps I'll just invite you to come up onto the stage so that we can put ourselves in readiness to take your session. Yes, come forward, please. Everyone come forward. So for all those to my left and the back, please come forward. Let's try and fill as many of the front seats as possible. Please come forward. There's still plenty of seats in the front. Please come forward. And to the rest of our colleagues who are outside, please come into the auditorium. We want to begin the program quickly. We are quite behind time now. We want to move into our third plenary. Also for the third plenary, do we have Rubat Oseni here, please? Oh, please come up. And do we have Mr. Ayodele Asaolu, who's the CEO of Lord's Way Energies? Are you here, please? Mr. Ayodele Asaolu, are you here? Do we have Isaac Yadonu Abua here, please? Isaac Yadonu Abua, you are the founder and host of the Change Africa podcast and a governing board member of the Commonwealth Human Ecology Council. If you're here, please join us up on stage. We want to begin quickly so that we can catch up with the time that we've lost. And for those at the back, please, I keep entreating you, come forward and fill the spaces in front. It's very important. Please come forward, fill the spaces in front. Let me just repeat myself. Please come forward and fill the rows in front. We don't want to see gaps, empty seats. Okay, so feel free. Someone whispered and said, that's for the president. Enjoy it for now. So why don't you come forward, please? Fill the rows in front so that we can begin with our program. So in view of the fact that the team for Plenary 3 is not fully consolidated at this time, we'll move on now and welcome. We'll move on now to Plenary 4, Security Through Integration, Navigating Geopolitics via Shared Infrastructure. And this panel will be moderated by Rubabat Oseni, Assistant Manager, Commercial Operations in charge of gas scheduling. And ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for her. She's ready to come on. Please come on. And she will be joined by a couple of speakers. Mr. Ayodele Asaolu, CEO, Lord's Ways Energy. Are you here? We'll also have Mr. Felix Bob Ositi, Senior Policy Officer in charge of African Energy Commission. Mr. Divine Selassie Agbeti, Acting Chief Executive Officer, Cybersecurity Authority, or your representative. Please come on stage so we can begin. Stephen. Do we also have Ms. Mabel Akwe, Senior Policy Analyst and Head of Monitoring and Evaluation and Learning. If you're here, please join us up on stage. Do we have Adaku Uferi, Energy, Climate and Sustainability Leader for the United Nations Office for Project Services, UNOPS. Kindly join us on stage if you're here as well. And then Solomon Emmanuel, CEO, Applied Technologies. Please do well to join us on stage as well for plenary session 4. I have some updated information for you. Papa Kojo Obeng from Modec. Are you here? Papa Kojo Obeng from Modec, please. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for him. So plenary 4 will be looking at security through integration, navigating geopolitics, and via shared infrastructure. So a little background to this session. The concept is that energy security is redefined as interdependence. This session argues that shared infrastructure, that is pipelines, grids, etc., is the strongest buffer against geopolitical shocks, making trade a tool for national stability. So you'll find that many of the topics we're discussing are interconnected. We're pulling down barriers, we are integrating, and we are forging our energies together. So ladies and gentlemen, please, I give you your panel. Moderator, you take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rubabat Oseni, and welcome to AETC 2026. And I'm glad to be your moderator for today's session. As the MC has rightly said, today's topic is going to be on security through integration, navigating geopolitics via shared infrastructure. And just before I set the ball rolling, when we talk about shared infrastructure, a typical example we have in Ghana is the WACP line, for example, which is a pipeline network all the way from Nigeria through Benin Republic, Republic of Togo, and terminates in Ghana here at Takoradi. We also have a station in Tema as well. So in Ghana alone, we have 2 terminal points. That's Tema and Takoradi. Another shared infrastructure we have in West Africa has to do with the grid transmission lines, where, for those who were here in the morning, you heard the minister saying that we do export power to our neighboring countries, Ivory Coast, Burkina Faso, Togo, and Benin. So these are some of the shared infrastructure that we actually shared amongst ourselves in West Africa. And it is very, very important that we need to integrate that. So please, just a moment. I think we're missing one of our speakers. Probably we need to get one more chair for Mr. Asaulu. Please, event coordinators, can we get one more chair for Mr. Asaulu? He's the CEO of Lordway Energies, all the way from Nigeria. Please, if you can have a chair up.
Yes, our technical production team would get a seat for him.
Okay.
In the meantime, you can come to the front, please. Our distinguished guests, you can come to the front, and then once the seat is ready, you move upstage.
Okay, so sorry about that. So, like I was saying, some of the shared infrastructure we shared is the transmission line, which actually is the grid transmission, whereby we actually export power to our neighboring countries, such as Ivory Coast, Benin Republic, Togo, and Burkina Faso as well. So without wasting much time for today's session, we're going to explore how this infrastructure can actually underpin effective governance, tech-enabled monitoring, and as well as serve as instruments for regional security and facilitate stable and cooperative trade corridor within the West African sub-region and Africa as a whole. So I'm going to start from my right. I'm going to start with Mr. Bob Ositi, a senior policy advisor with the African Energy Commission. And I'm going to ask him, how can shared energy infrastructure strengthen regional stability and foster regional cooperation among African countries? Bob.
Thank you, my sister. I don't know whether I'm audible. Good. All right. I think it's okay. So thank you. First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be here again from last year. I think we had a conversation last year as well on how we can be able to improve cross-border trading of energy. And I think this year's theme is also very, very important in terms of moving away from borders, and building more bridges. And the question you're asking is one that is very pertinent. How can cross-border infrastructure strengthen regional stability and also geopolitics? One of the things that I want to mention, number one, first and foremost, is that the creation or the construction of shared infrastructure across many member states is one way in which many countries can de-risk a lot of infrastructure development, but also economically, they will be able to share some of the costs that would be greatly demanding for one country. I want to start this by mentioning one thing, because usually we have interdependencies among member states. What we see across the continent is that many regional economic commissions, if you look at SADC, ECOWAS, East African Community, and so forth, usually depend on each other on a number of aspects. And that's why most of the countries are looking towards the risking and ensuring they have a lot of non-tariff barriers related to the trade. So there is a mutual economic dependence. Now, when you have cross-border infrastructure, you tend to develop and raise cost of conflict among member states. Good example of this recently, just last month actually, if most of you might have read the newspapers, you might have seen that Ukraine just accepted to restore the pipeline that was blown when they invaded the war with Russia. And one of the reasons why they did that, that pipeline was taking crude oil from Russia to Hungary and I think Albania. And because Ukraine needed at least about $90 billion, €90 billion loan from the EU. One of the conditions that were given to Ukraine was to ensure that that pipeline is actually restored. So what that showed is that you can actually increase cost of conflict by having cross-border infrastructure development. So had they not accepted to meet this demand, perhaps they would have not had even the access to the loan. So that is one of the ways in which we can be able to use cross-border infrastructure in order to geopolitically stabilize a country. We have just had in the East African countries, we have a pipeline that is coming from, crude oil pipeline is being constructed right now from Uganda, going to Tanga, which is the East African crude oil pipeline. And the nature of cross-border infrastructure development alone starts with having treaties between countries. You have host government agreements. This in its by nature enables that the countries can be able to build diplomatic cooperations among themselves, but also helps to stabilize geopolitically a region, because we can see right now the challenges of that the Middle East has developed that has brought in terms of the energy sector. And because of some of the shared infrastructure, even that Strait of Hormuz alone that was serving a lot of other Gulf countries have become critical because of the ability to share this infrastructure. The other thing I want to mention is what the shared infrastructure does. It reduces energy inequality. Right now, and that is what we decided to do as African Union to promote and support these regional power pools. The minister mentioned in the morning here how Ghana is now trying to even supply more electricity to Benin power. You're already supplying to Burkina Faso and other regional governments. We have the West African gas pipeline. All these are mechanisms to allow that excess capacity that exists in a particular country can be traded regionally. So these are some of the ways in which the regional infrastructure development can bring some of the benefits to the countries in which they are traded. Lastly, is of course about energy security. And we cannot overemphasize that more than we have already seen right now. Had Dangote not built that refinery and we had the supply that we are having currently based on the challenges that we are having from the Middle Eastern part of the world, we would have had a tremendous deficit and we would have not been where we are today. A number of countries have managed their deficits by getting this supply within the country, within the continent. And I'm glad that he's actually looking at developing similar capacities in other regions, including East Africa and perhaps even Southern Africa. So if we can do those kind of infrastructural development and ensure that we meet some of the regional needs, we shall also reduce not only our external dependency, we shall promote cooperation among countries, but we shall also make conflict very costly because of the shared interest among the countries.
Thank you very much, Bob. And it's interesting to hear that something is happening in East Africa, just as we have the WACP pipeline from Nigeria all the way to Ghana. But the intention of the WACP was to have the pipeline going all the way to North Africa, but it terminated in Ghana. But there's another project coming on, the Moroccan pipeline project, which intends to extend the pipeline to Northern Africa as well. So I'm going to ask the next question to Mr. Asaolu. And the question is, what are the major political risks associated with cross-border energy infrastructure projects, and how can that be managed? You are coming from a region where you have a lot of pipelines in that region. You've experienced a lot of risk. You've been able to do your SWOT analyses. You've improved over the years, and you're still one of the leading producers of oil and gas industry. Of course, you have infrastructure that you share with the IOCs and the rest. So how can this risk be managed in a geopolitical era that we are in now? Because we can't do anything without our neighboring countries. Nigeria seems to be far, but it's just our next door neighbor here. We can't do without Nigerians. They can't do without us. So in this sense, what are the geopolitical risks and how can we manage it?
Thank you very much. So Africa, we are going towards globalization. Like you said, okay, you've identified some of the key achievements that we have in Nigeria, but we're actually looking for a case where we don't necessarily have to have one country stand out so much like big brother and then have unfair advantage about every other thing compared to the others. So the first risk that we still have that is kind of nagging us in this border infrastructure is political risk. You have a government that comes into power and then they come up with policies. These policies are supposed to be long-lasting, but because after a period of time, maybe 1 term or 4 years, you have a different political party coming into power and immediately everything is abolished. Then we have to start from scratch again. And we've seen this happen over and over in different African countries that kind of do not allow us to have consistency in policies that will help us manage our border infrastructure. And the way we can go about it is we are not politicians, but in every way that we can influence what is happening in that circle by having this kind of conference, for instance, is part of what we can do. So we need to encourage the kind of polity that brings about long-term treaty that will not be broken, whether there is change in who is sitting in power or not. This kind of long-term treaty are what we need. And then we need to have a better dispute resolution mechanism also that can be applied across border. Then another one is we have imbalance dependency, in the sense that you can have a country that has huge power output and then they are providing power supply. Then you have another country that is just at the receiving end. And when you have something like this, over time, the countries that are dominant in supplying, they begin to have excessive power. And how we can go about this is, even if there are countries that cannot contribute when it comes to power distribution, we know that this power supply chain is huge. It does not end in generation. So even if you are not contributing in generation, you are contributing in distribution. If you are not contributing in distribution, you are contributing in security, so that we can flatten this dependency curve, and then every nation in one way or the other has something to contribute, and then we will be able to have better negotiations. Another one is, like you rightly said, pipeline vandalization. So we have physical and even cyber security issues. So I will not overflog this because it's something that we really know about. And I will only say that the way we can handle this again is to look at cross-border security, to have like a shared monitoring system where, you know, if you own something, you would definitely put your eye on it. So every country that is benefiting from a cross-border distribution of power should have the sense of ownership, that, oh, we own this. When you own something, you would not sleep at night because you want to watch over it. So it's not going to be, oh, this West African pipeline was produced by this country. Our own is just to receive the supply. If there is anything that happens to that pipeline, you are not going to get that supply. And another issue is finance. So, and this finance is in two ways. On one side, we have the financing of our projects. On the other side, we have the commercial risk of having projects that we execute and then we are not able to get our money back. So going into cross-border infrastructure, we have to understand that it takes some form of patient capital. That's to say, the kind of money that when you put out there, you have to be patient, perhaps for a decade, 2 decades, 3 decades before you can break even. So, and like we had in the first plenary session, we talked about investment and finance. So we need to be more creative on how to be able to raise such kind of capital that can allow us to do the kind of infrastructure that will live and outlive us. And then in terms of commercial risk, like I said, that you have contributions that are not being, investors are putting in money, but they are not able to get it back because they are not able to recoup what they have put in there. So we also need to have credible payment system. And this is something that I would say that the banking system has really, really improved, and we can really leverage on that. Now, there is one more risk I'm going to talk about, and this is the silent risk that everybody seems not to be aware. And this is the risk that the numbers are wrong. What do I mean by this? When you say 200 megawatts of power in Ghana, does it mean the same thing as 200 megawatt power in Kenya? What are your assumptions? What formula, what interpretation do we have? In one case, it may be a worst case scenario. In another case, it may be contingent on gas supply. So we need to unify our system. So lack of standardization makes our numbers to be wrong. Thank you.
Sorry, my microphone was off. So ladies and gentlemen, once again, we have in our midst Miss Adako Ofere. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, Mr. Osolu. So from what I got from you is we need to be intentional as African countries, and we need to pay more attention to the shared infrastructure and not just leave it to where the infrastructure actually originates from. But because we have shared benefits, so we also need to share the responsibility of that infrastructure. So I'm going to go to Madam Mabel from ASEP. In an increasingly uncertain global environment, how important is regional integration to safeguarding Africa's energy future? infrastructure.
Regional resource like the WAPG, then wherever the final output is, we will be able to transport it and share it across the various economies. So this one requires harmonization of both regulatory and nationalistic policies to ensure that individual nationalistic policies do not battle against each other. One critical thing that is also essential to promote regional integration is each other's comparative advantages. So when we look at the solar PV value chain again, we realize that there are some aspect of it that is energy intensive. So if, for instance, there is a country, you can produce, you realize that extracting the metallurgical silicon and the conversion to polysilicon are the most energy intensive aspect in the chain. So if we are leveraging on regional integration, for instance, we can look across the continent. Which of the countries among us has the cheapest cost of power? And that country can also has the requisite infrastructure, human resource capacity to be able to produce that segment of the value chain at a competitive price. Maybe it might sound over simplistic, right? But this is an idea that is possible. It's not supposed to say that once we do that, we'll be able to come out with the most competitive product. But we'll be able to come out with at least the most cost-efficient final product. China and Europe are taking the lead, so we don't expect to have a product that can be globally compared as a whole. But once we start from somewhere, we can leverage our individual comparative advantages. We can leverage on skill over time to also improve efficiency and have total output.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mabel Akwe. Now that you've mentioned technology, I'm going to go to Mr. Stephen Kujo, who is the Deputy CEO of Cybersecurity Authority, and I'm going to ask him, how can digital technologies enhance security, monitoring, and resilience of shared infrastructure systems?
All right. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So thank you. So it's good to hear we are putting efforts into more or less pooling our resources, our infrastructure together to be able to share power. But then we are doing that with certain infrastructure. We've got our transmission lines, we've got the generation points, and the like. And we have monitoring systems that are typically deployed for this. It used to be that in the past we talk of an air gap. So in the energy sector, the equipment you are using, your generation systems, your transmission, they are managed separately from the digital or the IT infrastructure. But over time, with the new technologies, we are beginning to more or less close that gap because you are using systems that are more or less they have legs in both areas. So now once you have IT systems interacting with what we call the operational technology, you now have a new set of risks. So if someone compromises an engineering workstation that is being used to manage something, then potentially they can hop into your energy infrastructure, turn off valves on a pipeline, knock off a turbine on a dam, and the like. And so the interest for cybersecurity is how do we secure this whole setup? So I'll look at it from 3 layers. So first, let's look at the equipment that we are using. These are not your typical computers. So for example, you can't go and just install antivirus or any anti-malware. But then there's technology that allows you to at least monitor the communications between the systems. So we can speak of what we call a protocol-aware industrial firewall, basically something that understands the protocols that your supervisory control and data acquisition environment is using, and then see that, okay, these are the normal trend of messages, but if something out of the norm appears, it's flagged, and then your teams can pick it up. You can look at some of the actual workstations that are used for the operational work, and for those also, you can look at some form of management system. Again, because you are careful to put or introduce your typical anti-malware, you can have what we call agentless monitoring. So you don't install anything, but you can still do monitoring for that. And then more recently, we are in the IT world, we talk about zero trust operations. So the thinking or the paradigm is in a given network, you do not any longer trust what is happening internally like we used to, but you verify everything. So that kind of mindset has been carried over to the OT world or the operational technology world. And last month we had a publication from the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency of the USA. They've created a paper showing how you apply that principle in a sector like the energy one or any other OT environment for that matter. And basically what it means is you are able to put certain compensating controls to make sure that you do not suffer any attacks. The second pillar I would like to talk about is at the national level. So you've looked at the infrastructure, but then you've got entities that play various roles in the whole ecosystem. So you have people that are doing generation, you have people that are doing the transmission. Okay, different entities. In Ghana, it's Gridco, VRA, ECG, and the like. Now, within their setups, are they able to monitor effectively what's happening within their infrastructure? So we talk about Security Operations Center. In the IT world, there is not such a thing, but now, again, from the operational technology side, you are beginning to bring in specialized technology that understands the OT world and gives the necessary alerts for the teams to be effective and to avoid the risks that are out there. Then you take it one further. Because you are working with each other, VRA generates, gives it to Gridco, Gridco distributes. If something happens in Gridco's side, we break the chain, there is no power. If something happens at the VRA side, something happens. If an attack manifests in any of them, we have a disruption. So the question now becomes, how do we share the knowledge we have within each of these players? So now you talk about what we call a sectorial computer emergency response team setup. So you have an entity where all these contributors can feed their view or perspective of the threats they are seeing, and then there's some synthesis that says, okay, VRA, we saw this thing happening in the transmission lines at Gridco. You have an interface there. Please go check and take such steps. So that sort of feeding of information up through that chain is also important. And then finally, when you come to the regional level, because now we are crossing countries, you talked about the West African Power Pool. Now, the question then is, okay, the threats that may manifest in, say, Benin, are you able to tell Ghana in good enough time for them to take some action? Maybe they need to patch a certain industrial control system, or they need to even just disconnect it. So you need to now build this regional information sharing centers. In the finance sector, they have this. So a bank sitting in Ghana can get intelligence from someone in Europe that, look, we are seeing this kind of threat on our banking app. Start checking yours. So as we share across the countries, we want to also be able to share threat information through such regional mechanisms. And then when you come to, again, at the regional level, you can look at some of the work ECOWAS is doing. ECOWAS is doing work around the Regional Cybersecurity Coordination Center. It started as the IT world, but again, we can quite easily bolt on the OT world as well. So that is not just the typical internet-related stuff, but also how we secure ourselves at the OT layer. And again, at the country level as well, you can also look at even the laws that you have in place. In Ghana, we have the Cybersecurity Act, which designates the energy sector as critical. And so that mandates certain actions backed by law. If across the sub-region, one country has, one country does not, you now have a weak point. So you need to also work at that layer using mechanisms like ECOWAS to sort of strengthen across the whole chain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stephen Kojo, from the Cybersecurity Authority, which is very, very important. Like you said, it's a value chain, so we can't just leave one of the sector out without the other, because once something attacks, for example, ECG, it's going to affect VRA, it's going to affect the grid system, because you will not be able to even transmit the power that has been generated by the IPPs or even the power plants who are processing the natural gas as feedstock for power plants. So from this point, I'm going to go to Papa Kojo, and I'm going to ask him, he's from the upstream sector, they are the ones at the top level, ensuring that these resources that we have here in Africa are being produced, explored, produced, processed, and therefore being used into several feedstocks, for example, for IPP. So I'm going to ask that how can countries balance national interest with the need for natural cooperation, with the need for regional cooperation in shared infrastructure development?
Thanks for the question, Robert. I hope you can hear me. Thank you. So I think I'll probably speak from the operations perspective in terms of managing different interests. As you mentioned, we operate upstream for MODEC, and our clients are Tallow. Tallow has various stakeholders, GMPC being one, Cosmos and other stakeholders as well, all with different interests, with different business objectives, but we still operate on a daily basis, and we still are successful in our operations. And it's because we have a system where there's a shared benefit and there's a shared risk as well. So I think when it comes to interest as a whole, there's a way to navigate both your aspirations for regional infrastructure as well as for national infrastructure. I don't think one diminishes the other. You take the recent events in Iran, where probably countries are having an internal dialogue as to building more national capacity so they can be more self-reliant. But I think it does not sort of diminish the importance of regional infrastructure, especially in Africa, where we need to sort of count on each other to develop. I believe that working together can yield those results. On the FPSO, for example, which is the platform upon which we produce the oil, we always have redundant systems. We have a primary system and a secondary system. And you can have the outlook when it comes to both national infrastructure, regional infrastructure. Regional, for example, West African gas pipeline can be your primary energy source, and you can have robust national infrastructure as your secondary as well. So I think that there is sort of that thin line. There are those tensions, obviously, because you also don't want to be over-reliant on external infrastructure or resources, but to be able to meet your energy demands, you have to tap into that pool. But that should not sort of diminish each entity's desire to build their own robust and comprehensive national infrastructure as a backup for contingencies, for emergencies as well. So I think that is sort of the dynamic you have to look at those different interests with. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think with regards to the interest that he just mentioned regarding the West African Gas Pipeline Company, I remember in 2014 there was a bridge in Togo where a ship went to lay its anchor on the pipeline and dragged the pipeline of the WACP. Then in 2014, that only did not impact Togo, but that was when actually the doom source started in Ghana, because for almost 3 months, the pipelines deep down under the sea was ruptured and it needed to be fixed. And this is a regional pipeline that involves Chevron, Shell, NNPC, VRA, and you can imagine a regional pipeline all the way from Nigeria, Benin, Togo, who are actually shareholders, including Ghana. VRA was fully represented by government of Ghana, were deeply affected because they need to put in money to fix the pipeline. They had to even bring out a law through the ECOWAS to set up something called the Pipeline Protection Zone. It's very interesting because this is the first time we're actually speaking about shared infrastructure in Ghana. All along that we had oil and gas, it's always been about investment into the oil and gas industry, but with the things we are seeing right now in happenings in geopolitical countries, it's right about time that we as Africans actually look inward to see how we can fix this. So it may be like this is a very long talk, but it's a very, very interesting talk that we all need to actually get more information and see how this can actually help us as Africans in the sub-region as well. So I'm going to go to Ms. Adaku Ufere, and what role do pipelines or transmission networks actually play in promoting regional independence and peace?
Right. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay, great. So regional infrastructure, so just to give a bit of context, I used to be the chief of party for USAID and Power Africa's West Africa Energy Program. And in that role, I oversaw 23 countries across West and Central Africa, just funding US government interests in the power sector of those countries. And because I'm working across a regional landscape, I'm having to think, obviously, regionally rather than individually a lot of times. Ghana was one of those countries. And when we have, like, we're trying to finance distribution lines for the West African Power Pool or the other regional transmitters, and a lot of, I would say in the 5 years I was chief of party for WIEP, I think we had about 6 or 7 coups or coup attempts in the West African region. And a coup in Gabon or Guinea has long-reaching effects to Ghana or even Nigeria. And so we always had to balance all those competing interests regardless of what we were building. And so how that kind of infrastructure kind of worked in a political manner. So when there was a coup in Guinea, we were working with a company called Transco CLSG, which is a transmission company of Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea. And once there's a coup in a country, I have to cut off funding because the US government will not put money into a country that hasn't had an undemocratic transition. So immediately we cut off, assistance to Guinea. But then because we had Transco CLSG, and Transco was working across the Mano River region and across these countries, we were able to fund Transco, and then Transco could kind of work in Guinea as well. And so even though a lot of countries stopped working with Guinea just because of this issue, but because they had shared infrastructure with 4 other countries, they're kind of forced to continue conversation. And so based on us being able to, my project being able to fund Transco CLSG, we're able to get Guinea's Suapiti hydropower plant to export 450 megawatts of clean energy to these other 3 countries. And that would not have happened if there was not a regional relationship. And so that's why I know, yes, we do get domestic infrastructure or domestic interest are as important as regional interest, but I think there's no African country that can, survive economically without shared interest. I think it's impossible to be in a silo, so to speak. And which is why, institutions like the West African Power Pool or ERERA, which is ECOWAS's regulatory authority, are so important in creating the policy, the guidelines, the geopolitical framework that will guide all of these decisions. So even if, Cote d'Ivoire and, say, Burkina Faso are not talking, but they have to sell power to each other, or else it will cause a problem. So even if the governments itself have issues, the utilities are still talking to each other. So it's very difficult to kind of shake that relationship when you have shared interests. And I think I would liken it to a marriage. You have shared interests in a marriage, whether you like it or not, you have to keep talking, no matter how angry you are at each other. And so that's why the regional landscape requires the interdependence. And which is why, for me, I feel the regional infrastructure plays a massive part in geopolitics.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So now that you brought in the aspects of financing and the securing cross-border, I'm going to go back to Mr. Stephen Kujo. Regards to what she just said, regards to the U.S. Funding for the power project, what role should the private sector play in financing and securing cross-border infrastructure assets, regards to cybersecurity as well? Like, are we doing something regionally through ECOWAS to ensure that we have that cross-border security amongst the region, particularly in West Africa or using ECOWAS, and then we go to maybe AU or the AFCTA that we now have on board now?
Right, thank you. Yes, so indeed the private sector has a key role. The reason being, at least when you take something like cybersecurity and the fact that it's borderless and you cannot operate by yourself, private sector participation is key. First, because they have the technology, they build the technology, and they are best placed to make it available to you, especially in projects like this. And so when you take, for example, the sub-region, what ECOWAS is doing, there are partnerships from GIZ, partnership from the World Bank, which are designed to help us, for example, build capacity in terms of the kind of people that understand the risks and threats that we face in terms of our development across the infrastructure we are building. And so they bring in expertise, and they also bring in funding in terms of making available platforms, making available capacity building programs so that we have that ability to protect ourselves. The connectivity they also provide in terms of who is able to interface with that type of technology. I was just talking about the CISA mandate from last April. So this white paper is done. Vendors would have started developing certain solutions. That interface to you is typically done by private sector, because a typical utility would not have the time or the motivation to go looking for this. But once you have partners, that are vendors that are, they understand these things, they can bring it to you, you evaluate, and then you begin to adopt. And so it's very important, and if you scale that up to the African level, it's the same. We've started doing, or one of the key interventions we've started with under Smart Africa is what we call the African, it's an association of all the national cybersecurity authorities. And so what you are trying to do is, you want every nation to come along in this understanding of cybersecurity, an understanding of critical information infrastructure and how to protect them. And again, that know-how, the technologies, we don't do a lot of the technology development on our continent. We import a lot of that technology. And so to protect it, you still need that partnership to develop it. And so it's key to keep the private sector very close to us. Of course, we need to get to the point where, as sovereign nations on the African continent, our universities are empowered through research and development to understand the infrastructure we are building and develop homegrown solutions. Maybe even some of the infrastructure, we can begin building it ourselves. I heard my colleague talk about solar panels. Those are things we can start doing and build a whole ecosystem around it. Once we learn from private sector, or even leverage private sector we have in country, we can move forward and protect the assets we are building.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go back to Papa, because he's very technical and actually in the middle of operations. So I'm just going to ask him, what technical solution would help prevent maybe a partner from unilaterally shutting down? For example, you're on the FPS, so maybe Talo will say, you know what, we don't want to do this. What can be done to prevent that from one party taking that decision based on their interest without looking at other parties or other partners involved?
So I think when it comes to regional infrastructure, there's always that risk of people taking, or one entity taking unilateral decision that affects the rest. I think Russia and Europe is a perfect example in terms of Europe's need of Russia's gas, which is played out during the Iran-US war as well. On the FPSO, we have something called SIMOPS, which is managing simultaneous operations safely without any risk. And I think a similar approach can be taken when it comes to making sure that no one country has that impact on what happens to the others as well. I think some of the initiatives or areas that we can look at is driving more joint ownership as opposed to access agreements. I think when each entity has a stake or equity in the infrastructure, they appreciate that what happens elsewhere affects them, so there's a bit more tolerance and more appreciation of risk. Also, I'm guessing West African Gas Pipeline has a similar model, making sure you have an independent body that actually overlooks the infrastructure as opposed to the different countries. That builds a bit more, objectiveness when you're managing the infrastructure, and making sure you have the right technical people as well, as opposed to one country being biased on their interests. And I think when it comes to that risk as well, it's important that the different entities have some contingencies, whether it's stored power or stored access to power, even with the regional infrastructure. Because as my other panelists have mentioned, there could be coups, there could be a track incident, or there could be something that could disrupt the access to the regional flow. So it's important that there's always that due diligence to have some storage power access so that you can actually still be sustainable or be able to mitigate some of these events. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to go to Mr. Asaulo and ask him about how regional institutions can actually help mediate disputes and promote trust amongst countries participating in shared infrastructure. Mr. Asaulo.
Yeah, thank you. Disputes, trusts, shared infrastructure. Before I go further, let me take you to your homes. Let's assume you live in a self-contained apartment. You are not sharing apartment with anybody. When the meter guy comes to read off what is in the meter and give you your power bill, you don't have to ask questions. You just go ahead and make the necessary payments. But now, imagine you live in what's in Lagos we call face me, I face you apartment, or some people say face me, I slap you apartment, where as you are coming out of your room, you are bumping into your neighbor right there. Now, this power distribution guy comes at the end of the month and reads the meter and then gives out the bill, and it comes in one piece to the compound. So everybody is supposed to make contribution. The question is, are we going to make it even? If you are 10 tenants, are we saying it's divided by 10? Someone will argue, I only have a radio transistor, I don't have electric cooker, I don't have electric iron. Why should I pay the same thing as neighbor number 3 who has all of that combined? And you begin to see disputes. So this is how disputes come. Then there will be that neighbor that actually claims that he does not have electric cooker but has one boiling ring that is hidden under his bed that he brings out at night to boil water to have his bath. That is trust issue. So these are the things that actually bring about conflicts when we are talking about shared infrastructure. And I want to say that in as much as we are trying to provide solutions here, and we are talking of what regional institutions can do, I want to say that we should appreciate a lot that is already being done. A lot of the speakers, Felix, Mabel, and even others have mentioned this WAPP. They are working. We also have the South African Power Pool. We have the East African Power Pool. We have a lot of regional institutions that are doing a lot in this area of mediating disputes and also helping countries to be able to build trust in this matter of shared infrastructure. In fact, African Development Bank is doing its own. African Union as a body is also doing its own. What are they doing? They are setting up rules. They are acting as neutral conveners that will not be on the side of one country against the other. They are also creating some form of dispute resolution mechanisms to address ongoing disputes and bringing them to a meaningful closure. In fact, in some cases, they also provide some technical verifications when there are claims about, oh, this is what we generated, this was what was distributed, okay, what are the differences, how much of power was lost, and all that. So they are doing a lot, and we need to appreciate them for that. Having said that, is that all that can be done? The question I want to ask is the reason of that. And that is where I want to bring in a little difference that, yes, a lot is being done by these regional institutions. But what we need to step into now is that these regional institutions have to come together and take over the books. So they have to actually own the books and be able to know exactly what is bringing about the conflict. Because if you are handling an issue from the shoots, you will be going about it over and over. But when you go to the root of the matter, then you can have a lasting solution. You know, there is this African adage that good fences make good neighbors. But we are not planning to build more fences in Africa. Rather, we are breaking barriers. So if what we are doing is to break fences and break barriers, then we have to replace those fences with something. And what can that be? Meter. So if you permit me, I will say, instead of saying good fences make good neighbors, we should say good meters make good neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to add that actually in Ghana, we have gone digital, so we don't go around reading meter again. So we're actually advancing right here in Ghana. Okay, so I'm going to go, I'm going with my last final question. So ladies and gentlemen, we'll be done very soon with our session. So I'm going to go to Rob and ask him that to what extent does regional infrastructure actually contribute to energy security and economic resilience? We've seen something been happening in Nigeria. Dangote has built the biggest refinery, and he's on this major expansion galore. He's in Kenya, Ethiopia, you know. So how can this infrastructure actually build a resilient economy for the continent?
Thank you. Is that a big question? I think we are all asking ourselves now, because if you want to know the cost of being energy insecure, you would just walk out with your car, go drive your car to one of the fuel stations here, and you will know that the amount you're paying per liter that you paid in January is different now. And I think what we are always striving for, of course, there are some people who have been, we had a meeting, we had a webinar about 3 weeks or so ago, about a month ago actually, in April, on the impact of the Middle East conflict on the African energy sector. We also just had the ministerial meeting a week ago, last week, on the 8th of May. And some of the ministers attended, and a few other CEOs from different energy sectors. And one of the things we are talking about is how can Africa actually become, in the long term, energy independent from, sort of external sources. Some people talk about energy sovereignty, but when we talk about energy sovereignty, we have to remember what he talked about. You need to own the value chain. So if you don't own the value chain, then it's very hard to talk about energy sovereignty, but you can talk about energy security. And I think a very good example is what we can relate to this morning, again from the minister's speech. You remember Minister mentioned here how they want to actually completely change the street lighting from the traditional grid to solar. That is one example of trying to be relatively energy secure by not only relying on one source of energy, but by diversifying. So when we are talking about regional infrastructure, the first thing we see is diversification of energy sources beyond the domestic production. Because what many countries always strive for is how can we produce more energy internally and look for, because we are not endowed the same, okay? Nigeria is blessed with oil, they have a lot of gas. Algeria, I live in Algeria, they're blessed with a lot of gas. I mean, they're 99.9% energy access in terms of domestic and even electricity. I live in Algeria, I don't worry about my electricity going off. Why? Because they have attained that by making sure that they can, leverage on their resources. There are many other countries that are struggling with that. I just learned recently, since last year, even previously, South Africa has been suffering from load shedding. South Africa is the biggest economy on the continent. But a country like Botswana, having excess capacity, was actually transmitting, although they still have some deficit, but they were transmitting some of their powers to South Africa. So what we find with regional infrastructure is that you are able to actually diversify your sources so that when you have a blackout or a fire like we saw in Ghana that the minister talked about, you can quickly be able to tap on some of the excess capacity from elsewhere. But that can only happen when you have infrastructure in place. Now that is exactly the idea behind the African single electricity market. I'm sure some of you might have heard about that, which the African Union has been working very hard with many of the countries in order for us to promote, because we need to build interconnectors regionally so that we can be able to use those extra capacities to meet those kind of demand. The second thing that in terms of energy security that I say is that when we have integrated infrastructure, we have economy of scale, which allows what I've talked about earlier on, for us to have backup capacity, but also grid stability. So when we are talking about the plateauing of demand, we are basically saying we should be able to meet our demand, and if we have to scale it up, we have the capacity to scale that. So if we do not have an integrated energy system on the continent, we cannot meet that as quickly as the demand rises. So that is the idea behind the African single electricity market, so that we can be able to meet that. So when we have integrated energy project development, we can be able to tap those sources very easily. Another one, of course, is the support to trade and industrialization. No country anywhere in the world has ever developed without industrialization. And at the center of industrialization is energy. And no one should deceive you. Think about it. Go backwards. Energy is at the center of industrialization. We can't talk about industrialization without energy. And we can't talk about economic growth without also looking at how we can promote our industrial sector. And that goes right in the heart of trying to achieve, of energy security. Because if we cannot have access to energy and we cannot industrialize, then how are we talking about economic stability or economic security? We cannot. So that is why it's important for us to be able to actually trade among ourselves. And now we have these big animal that the member states adopted, which is housed here in Accra. It's called CFTA, African Continental Free Trade Area. The protocols are there. More than 49 countries now on the continent has ratified it. Probably the fastest ratification in the history of African Union, I want to believe, was that one. Why? Because every country believes in it. It is now the real test of the pudding, as they say, the English say, is really in the eating. And now I think it's the time for us to try and get into the eating of it. And the eating of it includes energy integration and shared infrastructure. And that is where we need to have the rubber to meet the tarmac. Last but not least is how we can build this energy security through this integration, because it will help us to lower our infrastructure costs, but also attract the investment. I'm happy with the development that has been made already in the progress of on establishment of the African Energy Bank, which we have heard about this morning here. And the biggest challenge we see, of course, for infrastructure development is how we attract financing. A week ago or so, there was an African Forward Summit in Nairobi, which used to be, I think, it was a France-Africa Summit, something like that. But I think President Ruto changed the name, of course, with the with the agreement with the with President Macron. And one of the things that President Ruto mentioned, and I think it was making rounds on social media, was what we need from developed countries, the G7 countries and so forth, is really not the money itself. What we need is the G7 countries to acknowledge that all they need to do is this idea of credit rating of African economies that affects them when we go for financing is something that needs to change. Because when you raise my risk profile, then the interest rates from some of these banks will go up, the IMF, the World Bank, and so on. And yet we have our bank, the African Development Bank, which should be able to support us, but because of the shareholding that is also probably greatly external, we get affected. So unless we change that and say, no, we don't need money from G7, but we need you to understand that there are people who are ready to take some risk and invest, but you need to change the mindset. Because if I understand, Dangote built a refinery here, it's $20 billion, you know the stories, it's all over the internet, and he keeps saying it all the time. It took him risking his own financing money for his group in order for others to believe that they can do it, and they saw him doing it and said, okay, now we can help him. Now he has established. And a week ago, he was sitting down, I think, with the CEO of the Norwegian Sovereign Fund, and he was saying he now has at his exposure $40 billion to invest. And this is the reason why he's in East Africa trying to replicate and copy-paste 650,000 barrels per day refinery. And this can only happen if we sort of show, and I like the conversation that was happening earlier on here, that we have the appetite to do it, then we can attract others to see the capacity we have, and that will lower the cost of infrastructure because it is an integrated. So if Tanzania, Uganda, Rwanda, and Kenya agree on where to put that refinery, and Dangote has the credibility that he has shown and demonstrated by building this one successfully in Nigeria, why not? That's all we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please, a round of applause for him. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to, Mabel, from the ASEP point of view, this shared infrastructure, how can this project be designed? For example, he's talked about Dangote trying to replicate what he has done in Nigeria. How can that infrastructure project be designed to ensure equitable access and mutual economic benefits amongst countries? Now we see Dangote trying to replicate the same thing in the Eastern Africa, and then countries will have to benefit from it, not just one country, but that regional bloc in the eastern part of Africa. So how can we have equal access to that shared infrastructure?
Okay, thank you. So I think a lot of that has already been mentioned. Looking at the ECOWAS West Africa power pool is a good example. The West Africa gas pipeline is also a very good example. So in terms of designing and all that, I don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. There are existing mechanisms in place. What is needed, as Felix put it, is that it's in the eating, right? The sweet of the pudding is in the eating. How do we harmonize our individual policies? How do we address, for instance, regulatory bottlenecks? How do we harmonize tariff codes across countries to ensure that we have a very harmonized framework to guide the electricity market, or if it's even got to do with fuel, how do we regulate that such that the regulatory differences does not impede access to such critical fuel or such critical element. One key thing that has been another bottleneck to some of these regional arrangements has also been consistent payment default, from member countries. You have I'm sure those managing the West Africa gas pipeline can attest to that. Nigeria is owed a lot of monies from some of the recipient countries. Ghana, for instance, I recall a couple of years ago, they were threatening cutting natural gas supply and all that. So I think that kind of commitment, not to say that this is my neighbor, we are in a shared relationship, so you do not prioritize. No, that shouldn't be the case. We need to have respect for contracting terms, contracting arrangements. We need to have that level of commitment to pay. And on the other side, we need to also prioritize the need to deliver. While we appreciate that there are times that you are tempted to prioritize your national needs, I believe that proper communication mechanism, if, for instance, there has been some vandalism somewhere, or you foresee something like that within your local territory, that might forestall proper supply to neighboring countries that you are in shared agreement with. I believe that proactively informing or addressing these ones are very critical. I spoke about the financing earlier. It's very important that we do not just go about having a shared infrastructure, but that kind of shared financing mechanism is very critical. I don't think that countries default because they want to, but many times they are constrained by other critical social investment. But if we have some of these funding available that countries can rely on to cushion countries that are being helped, I think that would be a great one. One bit I would want to just add before I conclude, hand over, is still on the issue of AFTA. Again, Felix mentioned, and we all agree, that the issue of energy is very critical to Africa's industrialization agenda. But the question that we tend to ask is, when you look at the AFTA operating model, you realize that a lot of the traded materials are agro-based, right? A lot of them are agro-based. But you ask yourself, why don't we have a lot of energy, or how have we not opened up the operationalization to encourage a lot more of energy trading or energy technology and input trading to facilitate this kind of intra-African trading in terms of input development? I mentioned in my earlier stage that the production should not necessarily start and finish in one country. If really we want to promote shared infrastructure, if really we want to promote energy security and economic resilience, because it's through that industrialization or through that manufacturing capacity that we are able to build that replica effect of economic resilience through energy security. So that is very important for us to look at as well.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. A round of applause for all the panelists. I've gotten to the part where the MC is giving me signals that I have just 5 minutes to wrap up this session. So I'm going to go to Ms. Adaku in 1 minute, your final comments, and then if any of the panelists also have any comments to make, just 1 minute each. So from Ms. Adaku, you have 2 minutes, and the rest of the panelists actually have 45 seconds because you haven't spoken for a while. Thank you.
This time limit should have been instituted from the beginning. Right. I think what I really haven't heard today is everything that's underpinning infrastructure, financing, all of this would be completely, it wouldn't work without monitoring. What I think would solve this problem is a continent-wide monitoring dashboard, which we have tried to do in several ways. I worked on operationalizing the WAP ICCs, helping them with their SCADA. I worked on market monitoring with ARERA. And so the attempts have been made, but then if we're able to see where the grid is collapsing, who's generating what, where the technical and commercial losses are, then we can actually solve the problem. I think with his analogy of the neighbors and all of that, like if you don't know someone is hiding a boiling ring under their bed, you don't know how much energy they are using. And so if we're able to see the energy, then that works. And just to quickly add in, and I'm already working to solve this problem, because now I'm working with Sustainable Energy for All, which is a UN entity, and I'm supporting a program called Mission 300, which is funded by the African Development Bank and the World Bank to bring electricity to 300 million Africans by 2030. And we have 30 countries in Africa we're working with who have compacts, and these compacts have targets, they have challenges, they have bottlenecks. And we're using this compact to build a continent-wide dashboard where we're able to see what each country is doing, how much they need to do to get to universal energy access by 2030, and just basically where all the issues are. So all of this is, fine and dandy, but if we cannot see what the other person is doing, there's no trust and there's no follow-through.
Thank you very much. Any of the panelists with a comment?
Okay, what I would want to add is that the conversation seems to be like, is there sole responsibility of the government to do all this? But to build proper energy security, economic resilience through shared infrastructure and strengthen African trade, it's a collective responsibility. It's a multi-stakeholder approach. And of course, the government does not even have all the money and all the resources that is required to do this. One thing the government can do is to lead through policy, creating the enabling environment for private sector participation. Where the study that I gave, it should not take the government to going to add value, convert, going through all those chemical processes. But can the government create the enabling environment? Across government, you put in place the required policy across borders so that the private sector can trade across borders seamlessly with the existing framework that we have. I'm saying this because
you have 45 seconds.
Okay, so one thing is that AFTA can help us do this is providing proper clarity on the liberalization scheme, right? Because one of the major challenges that the private sector is facing is that lack of transparency. You might receive a rule of origin certificate here, you get to the export destination and it does not qualify. So this is where government can help the private sector to participate.
All right, thank you. Any other panel? Please, you have 45 seconds because the MC is really, really on my...
Yeah, okay. So if I may just dovetail from what Ada said concerning having a dashboard for monitoring, that's very, very innovative, and I'm glad to hear that such things are already in existence and being worked on. I would just want to add that we have to ensure also that such dashboards are offline. They have offline capability because of inconsistency in power supply. And apart from being offline, it also should be auditable so that if you click any number, you have to know the source of the number that you are clicking on. And every thing, all the assumptions that bring up that number also should be very, very transparent. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm taking the last one from the Deputy CEO of Cybersecurity Authority, because we can't do anything without ensuring that our IT space or our infrastructure actually is secured. So, Mr. Stephen, 45 seconds.
Thank you. So just to add, we agree sharing infrastructure is essential for our growth. And so for me, it's just to add that we should now start thinking about how we layer cybersecurity across. Let's protect our investment by applying the best practices out there. Cybersecurity is the way to protect the investments you are making across our nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, as they've all said, shared infrastructure actually strengthens interdependence among neighboring countries, providing mutual incentives for peace, collaboration, and coordinated policy making. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and listening to us. It's been a wonderful day to be your moderator for today's session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ruba Batosheni and your team. Yes, but we'll take a group photograph. So let's get ourselves together. Our photographers are ready. And while you are at that, I'd like to remind you that today's strategic session is just the first half of the day's program. Later on this evening, we are having the exclusive gala dinner and trade awards night, where we'll be giving award presentations to AETC 2026 winners, Energy Women of the Year. Awards will be given among a host of others. You don't want to miss this. It's happening right here in this auditorium at 6:30 p.m. this evening. And you'll be interested to know who our special guest of honor would be. We have Her Excellency Professor Jenana Opoku-Agyeman, Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, as our special guest of honor, along with Ga Manche, His Royal Majesty Ga Manche, Ni Taki Teko Churu II. They will be here this evening, so you really don't want to miss it. It's happening at 6:30 p.m. and it's right here in this auditorium. So you want to, if you stay too far, perhaps you just want to make some time, stick around for the program to happen. We'll have a host of speakers on the program, and for the want of time, I won't go through the entire list, but you really want to be a part of this program tonight. It is the exclusive gala dinner awards night and trade awards night. And you really don't want to miss out on that. It's happening this evening right here in this auditorium at 6:30 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, we are getting to the final leg of our program, the first half of our program. We will be taking key insights from Mr. Walid Ali Benupeti, who's the Director General of Information and Digital Transformation Authority. Ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together to welcome Mr. Walid Ali Benupeti. Do we have Mr. Ali Benupeti around? It would appear that we don't have Mr. Ali Benupeti, so we'll move on now to the final leg of our program, which will just take about 30 minutes of our time, and that is the last plenary session. It's the fifth. It is the fifth, and it's on critical links. That is the theme. Critical links, digitalizing the supply chain for strategic minerals. And so it will be moderated by Ms. Paulina Anaman, who is a leading corporate transactions lawyer and legal consultant at AB & Davids Africa. AB & David Africa is one of the world's most renowned law firms. And the speakers to join her for her discussion, her plenary session, Mr. Papa Obeng, Operations Manager at MODEC, Ziad. We also have Ziad Hamouin, who's Executive Director, Tarzan Enterprise Limited. We have Isaac Yedonu Abwa, and then also Mr. Sami Jemfi, CEO Gold Board, but he will be represented by Mr. Richard Nunekpeku. He's not here. Okay, he has to be represented by his Deputy CEO Richard Nunekpeku. Angela List, CEO in Nguvu Mining. Are you here? And journalists. Mr. Edward Atosapon, CEO and MD for Agricultural Development Bank. Are you here, please? Mr. Walid Benupeti, I think I mentioned, I called out his name earlier on, but it will appear he's not with us in the hall. Ms. Georgette Barnes Sichiado, Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Georgette Barnes Limited. Are you here? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll make do with the panel that we have, the panelists that we have. And so, Mrs. Paulina Anaman, you will be moderating this session. So,
yes.
In the words of the old Joe Latte, over to you.
Over to me. Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I know that it's been a long day, but we too, we want to have our day. We studied before coming. We won't go without talking.
Yes.
So, I think, yes, we were supposed to be 8 speakers, 1 moderator. But we have 3 speakers, 1 moderator. I'm going to turn myself into a speaker too. We are going to make it work, whether we like it or not. Do you agree? Perfect. By the way, my name is not Paulina. My name is Pauline Anaman. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen.
Madam Moderator, is it possible that we can wrap this all up in about 30 minutes, please?
No.
We would have to try.
No.
We have an evening session coming up at 6:30.
No.
So how much time would you need?
The same time, 1 hour, 30 minutes. No, you took our time.
Please bear with us. There's been quite a bit of...
it's not up for negotiation. Thank you.
So please try and wrap it up quickly for us so we can leave.
No, please.
I'm sure you will. You're a generous lady.
We will
Thank
not.
you very much.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll try. We'll try. We are talking about critical minerals in an energy conference. What has minerals got to do with energy? Have you thought about it? The answer is climate change. The energy sector contributes about 76% of greenhouse gases that cause climate change, which means that climate solutions would rely a lot on energy transition. That is the move away from high-emitting energy sources. If we reduce the emissions in the energy sector, we can solve 70% of climate problems. But addressing energy emission issues in the energy sector requires energy transition technologies. And these technologies depend on critical minerals. So do you see where the link is between critical minerals and energy as we speak? I'll give you some examples. So when you take renewable energy generation technologies, you need minerals such as rare earth elements, silicon, and copper. For energy storage, we need lithium, graphite, cobalt, nickel. If you want to produce electric vehicles, we need lithium, cobalt, and nickel. Smart grids, we need copper and aluminum. If we want to improve our energy management systems, we need silicon and lithium. So critical minerals are important for the energy transition. Now, it is said that Africa controls 30% of the world's critical minerals. But the question is, what have we done with it? There is a scramble for Africa's critical minerals. As of 2024, about 75 bilateral agreements have been signed between individual African countries and Western and Eastern hegemonies. China alone signed 11 bilateral agreements. As of this year, a new one has been signed. Some of these countries include the EU itself, South Korea, UK, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Russia, UAE, India, Japan, Indonesia. 12 countries from outside Africa signing 75 bilateral agreements for critical minerals. And when you look at the data, they are not seeking to add value. Their objective is to take the mineral away, because taking control of critical mineral supply is an energy security issue for these countries. And the question is, what has Africa been doing? Mind you, there is data to show that when minerals are just exported, the value is just 11 billion. But when you add value up to electronic vehicles, it's about $1.7 trillion. Africa is losing all of that through bilateral agreements. But that's just besides the point. Since 2009, we've had the Africa Mining Vision. We are delving, I'm giving the background to why this topic is very important. We've had the Africa Mining Vision, which has envisaged that Africa would develop and industrialize through its minerals. And one of the things that the Africa Mining Vision envisages is the use of technology and digitization to achieve some key milestones, such as having geological data that would improve our negotiation capacity at the table with all these investors. It also envisages mineral supply chains that are well integrated and properly coordinated so that we can ensure state-to-state cooperation when it comes to value addition. And also, more importantly, that minerals can be traced, that we can be accountable and transparent in how minerals flow and how revenues flow from these minerals. But what have we done so far? We are in 2026. We are still discussing issues that were identified by the Africa Mining Vision as far back as 2009, way before minerals became critical. Today, this panel of 3 wonderful gentlemen are going to solve the problem for us, for Africa. Please clap for them. They have all the solutions. We are looking at digitizing the supply chain for strategic minerals. With me here is Mr. Zaid. He comes with over 20 years of expertise in the transport sector across borders. With his knowledge, he would help us understand how we move goods and services affecting the mining sector effectively and efficiently. We also have here Mr. Randolph Ano. He is partner at KPMG. Randolph is good at business process improvement. He's a financial analyst, and he's also passionate about tech issues. And then we have Isaac Yedomu Abua. He builds tech products to maximize economic prosperity for emerging economies. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you. To set the ball rolling, I want us to begin from what we know. We have Ghanaians here, we have people from different African countries, and we know that we've been mining gold for a very long time. We know the revenues we've benefited from gold. We know the jobs that have been created. But we also know the problems that have come with the extraction of gold. We know that sometimes people evade taxes. We know that people are into galamsey, illegal mining, some of whom cannot be traced. We know that these are all issues relating to monitoring, traceability issues. And if we had tech products that could help African governments to trace some of these issues, the problems we see may not even be there. So my first question goes to Isaac. Isaac, how do you see Yes, so from a tech perspective, what is the most exciting digital product that you see is on the horizon that is not out yet, but could benefit the critical mineral sector so that it can even solve some of the problems we've seen in the gold sector?
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So you talked about traceability, and there is a core assumption when it comes to traceability that I don't think people think about, which is that for anything to be traceable, there has to be data. So it's either data that is congregated, that is available, or data that needs to be collected. And how usually we go around traditional traceability conversations is that we are going to trace X. So the participants in the ecosystem should bring the data, or we force them to bring the data through a law or something like that. It is my view, working with different industries, that usually when you ask people to share data by mandate, it doesn't work. And so you want to find out what are the commercial benefits, because everyone is in business, behind that data sharing that is going to ease that process. So I want to sort of steer away from the traditional view of traceability and look at an incentive-based approach of looking at, if you were supposed to trace X or Y, what would be the participant economic benefit for the ecosystem, and that would incentivize them into participating in said traceability. And so a couple of technologies exist. So in blockchain, there's something called zero knowledge proofs. The thing that is interesting about zero knowledge proofs is that if you were asking a miner to, let's say, share commercial data that you would need for them to audit X and Y, they are usually not comfortable doing that because they think about it in terms of trade secrets. That if I was sharing my percentages, I was sharing my relationships I have with other traders, or my route data, etc., that could be harmonized and used somehow. And I'll come to a later point where if we use, for example, some systems that are westernized, etc., one of the key things that people who are taking these data could do, for example, is sell that data or use that data somehow. So they are not usually comfortable with the idea, or make it harder for regulators to be able to collect such data. So what zero knowledge proofs do is that they strip away that high value commercial data that everybody is afraid to share, which is quote unquote a trade secret, and then share what is only relevant, so that we know, for example, gold coming from this country is ESG compliant, has no child trafficking, is this X, Y, Z. That is data which we would need for audits or from other commercial purposes, but not necessarily the full view of data that will make people uncomfortable.
So, Isaac, are you saying that the economic and commercial benefits of sharing data is higher than the risk?
Yeah, it is, but you have to communicate that to the people, and they have to buy into it. And you have to buy into it so that they do not make your job more difficult, as if you're a regulator or whatever. So there is definitely benefits. So one of them is that, because what does this do? This makes the traditional work of auditing the data or the product easier, right? It makes everybody in that ecosystem have an easier job to do. So a regulator gets their data. This person is confident that they are getting the right amount of gold. The person who's sending their products to the EU now gets an ESG compliant product, but now it's not having to overshare data, etc. So that is one of the benefits of that. Now, apart from zero knowledge proofs, you can talk about, let's talk about AI, which is very fancy now, right? So I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of processes that goes on with cross-border transfer of goods, right? Which is probably a lot of documents that need to be filled, etc. With agentic AI, for example, one of the ways that people are using it in pharma, registration, etc., is that we give all of the knowledge that exists right now to an AI agent. The AI agent is able to fill that, reduce a bunch of the work that is happening, so that there is an incentive for people to do that. So this is a couple of the benefits that we can think about it beyond, for example, what we know of traceability is an IoT device tracking a movement of this to this. That's already been done. I think these are more innovative, inventive ways of looking at the technology.
I have one last question for you on that. So, you know, people's behaviors don't change unless sometimes policy comes in. So my question to you is, what should be done on the government side to force people to share the data for traceability?
So, like I'm saying, if you force people to share the data, you might just get some people having to go through loopholes to prevent them from sharing the data. I think the best approach is go beyond a mandated way, because eventually you would create a system. I'm not saying that we should not create laws or edicts that makes the people liable to doing that. I'm saying that they have to have a commercial buy-in. So if that is setting up panels, setting up engagements for people to understand that this is how it's going to do, it's going to reduce the number of days you use to clear things at the port. And that is actually happening, that you move from 10 days from clearing port to 2 days of clearing your product. And if you are not participating, you're actually seeing the risk of not doing that. I think that's one thing. And the last thing I wanted to say is also tokenization of mineral assets, which is, again, a technology perspective to the issues. So right now, I have a friend, for example, who was looking for a loan, has a lot of gold sitting somewhere, but the banks will not necessarily give them as a loan if they want to put the gold somewhere. If you could tokenize them, which is basically send it into a blockchain where by tokenizing the asset, it becomes a new asset class that people can benefit from, then it becomes a financial instrument. So that is technology really solving a problem of I don't have money, I don't have that, etc. So I think those are more inventive ways that I'm not seeing the space using technology to leverage its ability to progress forward.
Wonderful. I think what you said is corroborated by Georgette. Georgette is supposed to be on a panel, but she's unwell. But then I badged her because she has a lot of experience. She's an engineer who has now transitioned to, providing mining inputs across borders. So I asked Georgette, share your experience with us. What are your experiences transporting some of these inputs to various African countries? What are the bottlenecks? And how can technology be used to address some of these bottlenecks? And Georgette sent me a response, which, with your permission, I'd like to read, which confirms some of the things you've said and even goes beyond to talk about issues under Africa Continental Free Trade. So she says that, from my experience across both the private sector and non-profit space, I see Africa's mining supply chain challenge as both an operational issue and a systems issue. On the private sector side, Working through GBL, which is her company, has shown me how everyday supply chain performance is shaped by customs delays, fragmented documentation, shipment visibility gaps, tariff inconsistencies, and constant pressure to keep critical mining inputs moving across borders. On the non-profit and advocacy side, I have also seen how weak systems affect transparency, accountability, inclusion, and market access, especially for smaller operators and cross-border actors. What connects those experiences for me is the role of digitalization. Digital tools can improve real-time visibility, document control, traceability, reporting and coordination across suppliers, freight partners, customs authorities, operators, and financiers. But digitization on its own is not enough. To make cross-border mineral and mining supply chains work efficiently, we also need harmonization of tariffs, customs procedures, data standards, and trade policies. If the same product is classified differently, charged differently, or processed differently from one country to the other, digital visibility alone will not remove the friction. That is why I believe the future of African mineral value chains depend on combining digital transparency with policy alignment. The AFTA gives an important framework for this through tariff liberation, rules of origin, customs cooperation, and trade facilitation. But in practice, those gains will only be fully realized if they are supported by interoperable digital systems that make trade preferences usable, documentation visible, and cross-border movement more predictable. So my position is simple. Africa's mineral future will depend not only on what we produce, but on whether we can build transparent, coordinated, and harmonized systems to move, verify, finance, and process these materials efficiently across the continent. This is from Georgette. So thank you. Please give it up for Georgette. She's unwell, but she tried to answer my questions. Most grateful to you, Georgette. Georgette's response moves us to intra-Africa trade, cross-border trade. Now I'm coming to you, Zaid. Like I mentioned, Zaid has more than 20 years of transport logistics experience. He is also an Africa integration advocate, which makes me believe that, Ziad, you have seen problems with, movement of people and goods across the continent through the work that you do. So I want you to tell us, what is the reality on the ground, and how does this reality reflect in the movement of critical minerals from one country to the other for value addition? So let's say if cobalt from DRC is moving to, let's say, Kenya, to be processed, what are some of the logistical issues that arise? And more importantly, for the purpose of this panel, how does digitalization help address some of these gaps you see?
Thank you, moderator, for the question. Before I start to answer with you, there's something that just happened and you didn't take too much attention to it. I've asked Isaac to help to share his mic, and share is part of the answer that I'm going to give you later on as we are talking, because
Perfect.
It's and some of the other aspects of the advocacy here, he unspoken, is also part of the solution. So at Borderless Alliance, our main vision is to promote the free movement of goods and people across West Africa by tackling the barriers to trade and transport in the region. And even though our focus is on agricultural goods and consumer goods, but the landscape for the logistics across African corridors is the same, whether it is critical minerals or agricultural products or normal consumer products. And so having said that, we know that our mineral corridors are highly fragmented. In fact, there's very little intra-regional trade from the extraction zones of our minerals and resources through borders and then into the seaport for shipping out of the country, most of the time in unrefined state. And even the trade that is actually going on is plagued by duplicated paperwork, manual inspections, and profound lack of visibility. And so digitalization basically rewrites this dynamic by focusing on 3 pillars. The first one is cross-border digital identities. So when you provide the drivers, the trucks, and the cargo with tamper-proof identities that can be made available to the border agencies which are in charge of these cross-border trades in advance, this will reduce the risk profiles. It will make them know in advance that this is coming. But then this has to do with the technicality of the solution, and I'll come back to that later on because the problems are not technical. As for the technical solutions, we have them, but we'll get that later. The second pillar is the integrated systems, single window systems that we need. And in this particular case, I'm talking about the interconnectivity of customs. And you know that, for example,
interconnectivity
of customs.
Customs, okay.
So in West Africa, we have something called SIGMAT, which is the Integrated Customs Management System, which is supposed to connect all of the 15 ECOWAS countries, now 12. Now, it was 15 when it was being designed. And it's being implemented, but with some gaps. Even, for example, within the Abidjan-Lagos corridor, the data the data corridor is not complete because we have gaps in Nigeria and gaps in Benin. But Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, even Burkina Faso is part of this integrated systems. Now, of course, Burkina is in the gray, but still, it is connected. The third point is the harmonization of data standards, which Georgina spoke about earlier. And this is the glue, because if Customs A software cannot reach out to Customs B, and they cannot harmonize the systems and the standards between, then the goods will eventually end up at the borders. So when we integrate these 3 tools, we transition from reactive stop-and-go border management to predictive one, and this will enhance the competitiveness and the reliability of our minerals and resources in the age of global green transition. And so, having said that, now, 2 main ideas that also answer your question with regards to the technicality of the solutions. Isaac was speaking, and we have technical solutions. But the fact of the matter is that we know what the technical problems are, and we know what the technical solutions are. But that is not really what is hampering regional value chains or preventing cross-border trade. It is rather the non-technical problems that are disguised as technical problems.
Tell us more.
I want to share a story with you from Lomé, where currently we have the Biashara Africa taking place, where a few years ago, as Borderless Alliance, we were resource people for a conference that has to do with the state of trade across the Abidjan-Lagos corridor. And so in some of the sessions, I was taken aside because I was a representative of Borderless Alliance, but also Team Ghana was there. When I say Team Ghana, representatives from the agencies and the private sector. And so I was handed a particular task of asking about the state of transit across Benin into Nigeria. If you remember, a few years ago, the borders were closed from Nigeria's side. When Nigeria opened the borders later on, Benin retaliated with something that looks like a technical barrier, actually, but it is not. And so when we were asking them about how we can remove this barrier that is preventing our truck drivers who have been sitting there for months, in some cases 6 months even at the time, to move into Nigeria, then someone taps me on the shoulder and says, "Sir, there are technical challenges to this issue and there are non-technical challenges. Today we are here to solve the technical ones." And this brings me to the first point, that this is not a technical challenge. And for it to be resolved, we have to move the needle on enhancing the political will of our leaders across the region in order to enforce the implementation of the regional regulations that will allow the trade in the critical minerals across the region. Because eventually, trade of minerals is the same as trade in agricultural products and others. And the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme, which gives duty-free, quota-free access to goods originating from within the ECOWAS territory. So the movement of these goods are supposed to be guided by the framework of the ETLS, and this will ensure that you can at least start to build your regional value chain by enhancing the movement. But then, of course, the value addition comes in, and we have a lot of work to do on that one, because it will cost to set up the structures for refinement. We need the power structures for it. We need the roads. We need all of the infrastructure that would allow us to add value and also to distribute into the region. And the second point that I wanted to talk about is the trust. I think, and your question was about the digital trade solutions. I think that the economic operators today have a far more basic need, and that is about trust. Trust in sharing the data, trust in actually engaging across between private sector representatives and public sector, and that is where we need to foster this engagement in order to enhance the creation of a more enabling business environment for the trade of our critical minerals across our borders, but also for the additional value of these critical in-house, so that eventually we will build the competitiveness and the value chains to compete in a global economy.
Perfect. I want to pick on the issue of trust, and I want to reconcile that point with what Isaac said earlier. So Isaac mentioned that businesses are normally unwilling to share the data because of trust issues, but if you create the economic incentive for them, they may share. Now, we are dealing with cross-border, which is state to state.
It is economic operators who are trading among themselves. So states do not trade. It is people who trade, eventually. But then we say Ghana trades with Nigeria, but it's a Ghanaian trader who trades with
Very good, but then there is
Nigeria.
the hand of the state in that trade between economic agents from
Maybe
different
because
countries.
they are the regulatory framework, right? So if you are the regulatory framework, then you have skin in the game, because you need to create an enabling environment that allows you to trade either across the borders or beyond the borders.
I guess my last question to you would be, how can we create the trust among economic agents trading across borders?
This is where part of the advocacy also fails, when we fail to identify what the real problem is. Because when you have what you perceive as non-tariff barriers or non-technical barriers, trust eventually breaks down, because it is a relationship between human beings. When you have people who fear loss of their opportunity to create a certain benefit from these barriers, when you have resistance from some of the agencies or even of the economic operators, when you create a digital platform that removes the human factor, that allows these goods to freely move, or to create an enabling business which reduces the cost on both the economic operators and on the governments. But it always boils down to the trust between these elements. And so I think we have to go back to the drawing board to look at how to resolve a socio-economic issue instead of making it a political one. And so trust will boil down to building this relationship and to gain the buy-in from the economic operators and the agencies in order to drive with a solution that will eventually inure to the benefit of the economic operators. Because eventually we all want more competitive value chains.
Okay, so if I understand you, you are saying that we can talk all about digitalizing the supply chains, but if we don't address some of the human bottlenecks,
if they don't want to use
we
the
won't
system,
go
so what do
anywhere.
you do? Exactly. They have to have a need and a reason to use this platform, and they need to trust in the fact, as Isaac said, that I'm going to put all of my critical information inside this Internet of Things, right? Thing, because lots of people do not have that kind of visibility.
Thank you so much for that. Right. That's very insightful. Isaac, I'll come back to you. I'll come back to you. Hold your thoughts. So let's go to Randolph. Randolph, if we've talked about cross-border trade, sharing data, and all of that, and all of that is to ensure that logistically there's efficiency in the value chain when you are moving goods from one border to the other, critical minerals from one country to the other. So my question to you is, if you could mandate one data standard for mineral exports, if you could mandate that, if you had all the power to ensure that that is done, to improve logistics, what would that be?
All right, thank you. All that we've been talking about so far, what underlines it is data.
Yeah.
Right? We can't talk about digitalization or innovation without data. Computing 101, garbage in, garbage out. Right? So data is key. Before we started the session, we had a meeting outside, and Ziad, Isaac, and I were like, okay, so we are all speakers, but we saw some other classification on our tag, and we're like, okay, what's the basis of this classification?
Yeah.
Right? It's because of data. Right, so data is key. And if we are going to look at one standard, usually, because we are talking about strategic minerals, the mining sector, people may be looking at different kind of data, but globally, there is a global standard. So there's something called Global Standard 1, or GS1, and they have defined a standard, which is the Electronic Product Code Information System. That is an ISO now, that particular standard. What that does is that it helps to, so it addresses what they call the 5 Ws.
The what?
The 5 Ws.
5 Ws.
Right, so it's looking at the what of the product, where, why, who, and by whom. And if you look at this, this particular standard, it tracks the entire life cycle of a product. And that really is what is driving, if you've heard, the digital product passports. So EU today, EU by passing its Critical Minerals Act, is creating what they call the EU Digital Product Passport. Today is the 19th of May, right?
Correct.
Come the 19th of July, 2026, for some product to enter into the European market, your product must comply with the EU Digital Product Passport. And the standard that underpins that is the GS1, the standard I mentioned, that code, which is now an ISO. That is what underpins it. For critical minerals, come 2027, for any critical mineral to enter into the EU market, that must also comply with this particular standard. So if you look at the standard, really, it helps to address, of course, we need to use solutions to address our traceability issues and all of that. And this, by adopting a standard like this, you are compelled to comply with all these traceability requirements, because an item or a product is moving from a mine site, you capture all these elements. So what is happening to it, where it's happening, who is doing what, all of this is being recorded. And this standard has been in use for a very long time. So there is no need in the mining sector, in the mining space, to be looking at a different standard. This is global. And for EU to be adopting it, I think if from an African point of view, if we are looking at a one data standard for all products, especially critical minerals, to go by, then I would suggest this standard. Today, in South Africa, because they have taken, they also export to the EU market, they have developed a platform to help producers or miners or exporters from their market to comply with that standard.
Right.
We call that the Africa Digital Product Passport.
Right. So Randolph, we no longer want to export raw critical minerals to the EU.
Sure.
If we should add value and export to the EU, would that standard still apply?
Yes.
Okay.
Because what is going to happen is, what is happening now, at some point, market access will become difficult. You may not even get your OEMs or those manufacturers who are producing to buy your product. Of course, there are certain markets, maybe in Asia, some of them are not too rigid when it comes to that. So your product can still get to those markets. But for certain markets, for you to have access, all these elements must comply with this standard. So if you are not complying, you may not be able to take your product there. And here we are not talking about just the raw product, the finished product. So your BYDs, your Teslas, and the rest are careful to ensure that whatever element they are using are complying with these. And therefore, even if we are, as Africa, we're trying to create our own hubs, processing things here, you may end up exporting some of these components or this to other markets. And so it becomes relevant for you to comply with that. So you're able to take your product everywhere. At least it becomes a compliant product. And that is where that's how things are happening. And we need to look at that and position ourselves accordingly.
Perfect. So from this panel, from the three of you and Georgette, I have learned something new. I've learned new things. My understanding is that the critical mineral supply chain can be digitalized. But to digitalize, we need data. But to get the data, we need people to trust. We need people to willingly give that data. And from the businessman's perspective, there's an economic case to digitalization. You can get people to digitalize when you make the economic case for it. That's what Isaac gave us. And then when we go across borders, yes, digitization can help with cross-border, transport of supply chain, critical minerals and mining inputs and all of that. But there are human elements, non-technical issues that block the full digitalization of the supply chain, which we must first address in order to achieve the digitalization we want to achieve. And then there are also standards that can help with the export of goods across borders in Africa. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel at all. The EU has certain standards that we have to follow anyway, right? We can just adapt to our context and make it work. So since I want to be generous, I want to end the panel. But to end, you are not happy, eh? But to end the panel, I want your last words. I know, Isaac, you wanted to make a reaction. Do you still want to react?
It was actually sort of a question, because I wanted to interact with him.
Okay, please go ahead.
I agree with him. And that will be our last submission on the panel, hopefully. I agree with him. There are human bottlenecks in all these African supply chains, right? And what I want to know, because he's been doing a lot of stakeholder engagement, is that vis-a-vis technology, because I think stakeholder engagement is fundamental, right? Because these trust issues are from usually individual experiences, history, and there are perceptions backed by those experiences that people are not willing to let go of. How scalable is that? Because in my mind, I think that's more fundamental to make sure that we can harmonize people across different cultures, different ways of doing work, and then maybe technology comes to scale it. How do you think about that? And then to Rindo, you were saying something very interesting around standardization, all of that. No, but with what I also have an interest in is that, for example, we have a procurement problem in Africa where a lot of our technologies is being outsourced to the West, right? So I could give an example for people who are supposed to be on a panel, how Ghana needs this, and then we have rushing to AI solution here, there. Then there are people who could do that here. And there's a data sovereignty question there. So if you are going to European standards and all of that, how do we sort of make sure that, first of all, they are working towards local realities, and then how are we making sure we have data sovereignty and not get data colonized? I'm thinking about these a lot.
So 3-in-1 question from the acting moderator. And what I can say, well, I'm thinking around 2 layers. The first is the regional one, because we have a regional framework to guide our regional trade. What we lack is the enforcement of the implementation of these regional regulations on country level. And that is where most of the difficulties take place, because there are human factors at the junctions, let's say, especially at the borders and the border crossings, that have to do with the fact that everybody is looking internally to protect their markets. Now, this is a different layer altogether about the solution itself. When you're talking about the technicality of the solution, you can work on the protection of the data and the rigidity of the structure and on the information, the rules of origin verification, all of the aspects of the digitalization of trade. And once you come with a solid solution, you will have to start by sensitizing the users in order to generate their buy-in. And once you have the solid critical mass of users who are convinced that this solution will help us, will reduce our costs and times, and it will bring in more money to your government, now you have a potential ally, because when you go to the implementation phase, there will be unholy alliances of those who will eventually lose from the implementation of these rules and regulations. The only reason there are non-technical issues that are preventing the enforcement of implementation of these rules is because there are people and entities who are benefiting from keeping the status quo. So these are two different layers. We can go back to some of the regional trade agreements. I'll not focus only on the ECOWAS one, maybe continental or beyond. These agreements that do not receive the adequate buy-ins from the economic operators and the users will eventually either stall or fail. Because now we are coming to tell people we woke up yesterday and today we are coming with our laws, and it's up to you to start to amplify, to clap for us and to start to use it. And now people will say, but we can't use this because this. So what are we going to do? It's unimplementable in our country. Our customs will require a commissioner's note, our this thing here, our that thing here, something. And then you have to go back to the drawing board and decide whether you drop it altogether or we keep it in status. And so with time, we end up with an endless list or pile of agreements that get signed somewhere in Kigali or in Nairobi or in Addis or in Abuja, and then you come back to Accra or to Dakar or to Burkina or to Ouaga, and then you find out that you cannot implement it. And you move on because you have ticked the box. So let us think about it on these two layers. Let us think first of all on building an adequate technical solution that will preserve the sovereignty of the data and the usage to the benefit of the economic operators. And then let us sensitize the users so that they can become a potential ally in order to approach the agencies and the governments who are involved, so that we can enforce the implementation of these regional regulations to the benefit of all parties involved.
So maybe just to answer you, of course, standards may be developed elsewhere, but you need to look at your local context and to adapt. So if you look at the global data privacy regulations, for instance, we have our own data privacy laws, of course, riding on the back of that, but you adapt it to suit your local context. So with all these standards, you need to look at it to say, how do you leverage it? But if it doesn't work for you, it does not mean you go forward with it. So I think you need to adapt. Looking at the topic, one thing, when I was preparing for this, a thought that came to mind is, if we digitalize supply chain and we do it well, maybe it can help us to address some of the illegal mining that we see in our system now. Illegal mining, or in Ghana as we call it, galamsey, is destroying water bodies. And I see there's opportunity in this to really bring this down. If you think about it, if we look at this fully, if we have a very transparent and a digital supply chain working in the country, that can help to also reduce that. So maybe that is something that we can continue to ideate on even beyond this.
Perfect. Isaac?
Yes, no, I mean, the illegal mining case, because we didn't get to talk about it, I think it boils down to what Ziad says, that there are people who are benefiting from the system. And that's what maybe most of us are not being honest about. Because one of the key things when it comes to illegal mining is the infrastructure that is used to mine, right? If every tractor, every bulldozer that's coming, right, is registered to the company, the person, whoever is bringing that, immediately we see stress and we know who brought it in Ghana
Yeah.
and know what they are using it for, etc.
Yeah.
And we have systems that can actually make it simpler. But the truth is that we see these things all the time. We say they are banning them and then they get reused.
Right.
So there is a multi-faceted problem there. As he said, and I rarely agree, the technology exists. It's not a technology problem. And if there is a buy-in, you can implement the technology today and it will work. But I think that there needs to be a proper honesty about what are the loopholes and a commitment to solving them. Then the technology can come and actually implement it.
Perfect. Last words, Ziad.
Okay, it can be a last word, but it's a thought based on what, an inspiration based on what Isaac is saying. Because look, if you think about it, illegal mining, just like informal trade, it will continue to exist. Because there's absolutely no way to regulate each and every inch of the 100,000 plus square kilometers of Ghana. Just like you cannot regulate the borders, the porous borders of Ghana or any West African country or any African country to that extent. So I think the solution will involve thinking about it differently, about what is the incentive for these informal miners to convert into formal mining in a way that becomes sustainable both economically and climate-wise. It's the same argument that we think about when we talk about informal trade. Because informal trade is not illegal trade. And informal mining is not illegal mining.
Yes.
It's just the instruments of the use of it to the service of artisanal mining that is causing the devastating impact. And by the way, galamsey is not galamsey.
But hold on.
Galamsey is informal trade, but performed by traders. So
wait. So galamseyers don't have license to operate. That is what makes it illegal.
But informal traders don't have licenses to operate.
That is illegal.
Because
as a lawyer, I put it to you.
No.
That's it. It's illegal.
I'll tell you why I know. Because you are allowed under a certain threshold to operate as an informal trader. So petty trading is not a crime in case.
So right? It's informal. So in Ghana, small-scale miners are allowed to.
Exactly, but when it becomes gray area is when, and I'll give you an example.
There's no gray area in mining
I'll tell you. If you allow me to land, I'll explain to you.
Okay.
You can have an articulator of goods, and you get to the border, and then you bring at 9 p.m. across the borders, a fleet of about 1,000 people who move your 40 tons of goods 1 kilo at a time overnight. And they go in with their head loads, which is completely legal. And they move to the other side, and they pile it on another truck that continues on the road. That's a loophole, and that's legal. But it is the deceitful manner in which you convert in order to escape the taxes, instead of just moving with your articulator to the other side. And this brings me to the argument about the illegal mining. Galamsey is not illegal because itself is illegal. It's because you are using it as a pretext, but then you are using excavators. So what is the artisanal thing about excavators? Excavators are not illegal mining, are not artisanal mining. It's commercial.
Yes, we can continue.
Are you getting me?
I'm trying to get you, but yeah. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Please give it up for the panelists. We tried. 3 out of 8, we tried. Thank you so much for your audience.
Another round of applause. I think the discussion was getting even more interesting at the tail end. Don't you agree? Yeah. I figured. Thank you so much, Pauline and your team. Wonderful work. They will take the group picture now. Maybe we should have another session on illegal mining. I don't know. The perspectives were just original and very true. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you. And ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time and for being a part of the Africa Energy Technology Conference 2026. As I said, this evening we are having the exclusive gala dinner and also trade awards night. And it is open to all who have the VIP passes, all our speakers. And then also all those who bear the all access cards, you're invited to join us this evening in the next couple of hours for that gala night. I mentioned that we are hosting as a special guest of honor, we will be having Her Excellency Professor Jenana Opoku-Agyeman, Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, and then also His Royal Majesty the Gamancheni Takiteko Churu II. They would be here tonight for our exclusive gala dinner and trade awards night. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being a part of this program. We look forward to see you in our subsequent days. The conference goes on for 3 days. It is today. There's a session coming up tonight. We'll have another tomorrow and all the way up to the 22nd of May. Thank you so much and have a good night.